Good morning. How are you today? Good? I'm glad to be with you here, and thank you for coming. I know it's early in the morning to listen to my talk. I'm going to be talking today about my recent book, Anatomy of Terror. My career was mostly in counterterrorism in the FBI. I was recruited at a very young age. I was about 25 years old, actually the youngest you can be in the FBI. And in 1997, I decided to write a memo to the FBI leadership that we need to pay attention to some dangerous man. His name is Osama bin Laden, and I think down the road he will be a lot of trouble. The memo made it to the head of the counterterrorism and head of national security, actually, for the Bureau, John O'Neill at the time. He was the head of national security in the New York office, which is the largest FBI office. And, John and I developed a relationship. After the East Africa Embassy bombing, I was moved to work on Osama bin Laden. So I worked with the in investigating the East Africa Embassy bombing. We had a lot of disruptions and a lot of successes against al-Qaeda network between 1998 and between 2000. We had an operation, for example, in Amman, Jordan, where al-Qaeda wanted to attack 4 different hotels and the border crossings with Israel. Also, they wanted to assassinate the Pope, John Paul II, at the time when he was performing baptism on the Jordan River. I was tasked to be in charge of that operation. We were able to disrupt it, arrest 15 people who were involved in it. Interestingly enough, the head of that operation was an American who was born in California and lived in Boston. He was able to escape, but finally we caught him at a third country and brought him back to Jordan. Then we had the Uss Cole Attack. That was a very close investigation to my heart. Immediately after the attack, we're tasked to Yemen, a country that we did not have any security relationship with. Pulling the bodies of the 17 American sailors who were murdered that day on October 12 of 2000 was something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. But also the Uss Cole Attack investigation was such an amazing investigation in a way that if people listened to us in Washington about what we were doing in Yemen, 9/11 could have been stopped. And this is not what I am saying. This is what even the 9/11 Commission said. The Commission in their report, they said that if the FBI team who was investigating the USS Cole, which is my team, I was in charge of that team, was giving the information that they were asking for, 9/11 could have been stopped at its early stages. Unfortunately, we know, I think a lot of you probably will know the story about the CIA and the FBI not working together, not sharing information together that resulted in that tragic day on 9/11. But the Cole attack was an amazing opportunity to disrupt that horrific plot on America that took place on September 11, 2001. After September 11, my life was just literally from one plane to another, from one city to another, from one country to another, disrupting plots and arresting Qaeda operatives. I finally left the FBI because of 2 things. I loved the organization. The organization supported me throughout my career. We continue to have an amazing relationship with so many men and women in the Bureau. But it was 2 things, basically, in 2005 that led me to leave the organization and resign. I believe that either you can lead, or you can follow, or you have to get the hell out of the way. And I decided that I need to get the hell out of the way. 2 reasons. One, 9/11. Going in front of the 9/11 Commission and telling them the truth about what happened, giving them the evidence that I have about what happened, upset a lot of people in Washington. Upset people like George Tenet, people like other folks, let's not name. And that wasn't something that some people appreciated. At the same time, the FBI continued to support me, and Director Mueller continued to support any agent who basically says the truth and don't care about the consequences. Another thing, which is as important, was my stand on torture. I was one of the very first people interrogating the high-level Qaeda detainees, and I believe that they were cooperating. This is now, the assessment also of the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence, their report on torture and many other reports to include the CIA Inspector General. I didn't believe that we should lose our values and our principles in order to just take revenge on detainees. I think we have significant experience in extracting information and intelligence, and a lot of the stuff that at the time people like even the President of the United States were talking about, for example, how we get information, how we identified that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was a mastermind of 9/11. They claim it's because of waterboarding. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am the one who got the information, and it wasn't because of waterboarding. And if I tell you, you will laugh. It was like, we had Tom Hanks yesterday here. I Forrest Gumped myself into it. I had no idea what I was asking, and he had no idea what I'm saying, and a bluff became. Now, the details of it, believe it or not, I cannot tell you because I am not allowed to. They consider it classified. If I want to lie to you about what happened, for example, in any of these instances, I can, right? And it's not classified, but it's classified to tell you the truth, that it wasn't because of waterboarding, it wasn't because of torture, it wasn't because of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. So this is only one of the incidences. Another incident is Padilla. They talk about Jose Padilla, for example, as a person who wanted to be a dirty bomber here in New York. Well, my team also, working with a CIA team, we get the information about him. And it wasn't because we waterboarded Abu Zubaydah 83 times. Matter of fact, waterboarding did not start until August 1st, officially until August 1st of 2002. Unofficially, I think they started in July 25. Padilla was arrested in May of 2002. So unless you have a time machine, it's impossible to say that waterboarding resulted in the arrest of Padilla. So that definitely created a lot of problems in a nutshell, that resulted in me leaving the FBI. I started my own business. I finally had time to have children. I was setting up this double swing, because we had twin boys. And suddenly, when I was working on it, they said that President Obama is going to address the nation. He announced that we killed Osama bin Laden. I was happy about that. I had mixed feelings about what does that mean. All the years that we spend disrupting this evil man's plots and going around the world trying to save lives. But also at the same time, I felt some sense of relief for some of the friends that were killed because of the actions of Osama bin Laden. Not only the 17 sailors, not only other people in the intelligence community that put their life on the line and gave the ultimate sacrifice to protect this nation, but also for something more personal. John O'Neill, the person that I told you about at the very beginning. John, who was the head of counterterrorism, the head of national security, he was my boss. He was trying to make people around the world, not only in the United States, understand that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda are a threat. He resigned from the FBI about a week before 9/11 to become the head of security at the World Trade Center. He was killed on 9/11. John, it's like his personality, his life, it's just a Shakespearean character in so many different ways. About 20 minutes after President Obama finished his announcement, the New York Times called me and they asked if I can write an op-ed about what happened. And in that op-ed that was published the next day, I basically said, let's not rest on our laurel. Bin Laden is killed, but his ideology lives. And one of the things that I mentioned that, Ayman Zawahiri won't be able to keep al-Qaeda unified for a long time. I hate to say that both assessments were spot on. ISIS is basically the branch of al-Qaeda in Yemen. ISIS used to be al-Qaeda, sorry, in Iraq. ISIS used to be al-Qaeda in Iraq, and Ayman Zawahiri wasn't able to keep them under his control. And today, the reason I wrote this book, Anatomy of Terror, is to explain why, after a few $1 trillion, after a war on terror that started, I think, before 9/11, but on 9/11, let's say, al-Qaeda today is stronger than ever. The Salafi jihadi movement that bin Laden brought to life is stronger than ever. ISIS is part of that Salafi jihadi movement. They believe in the same thing as, you know, they believe Osama bin Laden is their leader too. They used to be his affiliate in Iraq. So why a person who had 400 pledged members on the eve of 9/11, 400 pledged members on the eve of 9/11, have now a movement of thousands upon thousands of people all across the world and all across the Muslim world? What happened? How did we spend a few $1 trillion just to make al-Qaeda thousands more than they used to be on the eve of 9/11? This is a question we have to ask ourselves. This question that citizens need to understand what's being done in their name, and or the blunders that the national security system sometimes they do and we don't focus on as much. I decided to look into it and say, okay, you know what? Where did we go wrong? I understand that every time a catastrophe happened, invasion of Iraq, 9/11, we have commissions. We have people who start investigating what went wrong. They always sit with people and people say, we could not imagine planes hitting building. We just could not imagine that. We cannot imagine it will take more troops to secure Iraq after Saddam than it will take to take Saddam and his security forces down. This is actually, Paul Wolfowitz said that in front of Congress. We could not imagine. We always blame our imagination. Well, yes, our imagination is very limited. Our imagination is limited to our own experiences, our own knowledge, our own ideologies, our own perceptions, our own insecurities. And I think we have to bridge that gap in our imagination with empathy. And I don't mean empathy in a colloquial sense. I mean empathy in a clinical sense. Can we imagine our enemy as they see themselves? Can we walk in their shoes? Do we understand them on this deep level? Do we understand what are the incubating factors that feeds into them being able to recruit people, into them being able to ask individuals, men and women, go and blow yourself up for the right of a cause, and they are so happy to leave their loved one, their family, their kids to do that? Do we understand that? No, we don't. No, we don't. Sun Tzu across the millennia said, if you know your enemy and know yourself, you will win 100 times in 100 battles. Guess what? We didn't take the time to know our enemy. We took the time to know the press clippings, our own press clippings on the enemy. We did not take the time to reflect on who we are. So we didn't know the enemy, and we forget about who we are. And that's why 400 members of al-Qaeda on the eve of 9/11 became a movement of thousands and thousands of people. So I wanted to delve into the personality of these men who want to hurt innocent people around the world. These men who took it upon themselves to decide who is the faithful and who is the faithless. Who are these individuals? Where do they come from? Why they are able to be so effective? And this is what Anatomy of Terror is all about. It takes you on a trip with Osama bin Laden after he was able to escape Tora Bora in Afghanistan. how he was living with his kids, with his wives, with his family, how he was dealing with his commanders, how he was looking at the world from far away, from his hideout in Abbottabad, and he's thinking, wow, we have an opportunity now to continue the fight against the United States. Osama bin Laden did not want any of his followers, and not even the affiliates that came back later, to focus on any other enemy but the United States. He told them, think about the war against America as a tree. This tree have a big trunk, and it has a lot of branches. The branches are NATO, the UK, Arab countries. All these things are branches. So you're cutting the tree, and you're in the middle of the trunk, and then suddenly you realize, oh, I can cut small branch. Do you stop to cut the small branch? No. You keep cutting the tree, because when you cut the tree, all the branches will die. I'm not saying that as a metaphor. This is word by word what Osama bin Laden ordered his commanders to do. He was so micromanager. He was telling his affiliate in Somalia what kind of crops they should plant in Somalia that goes with the weather there. He was actually concerned about climate change, and he was telling his followers in different places, like in Pakistan and other places, how to deal with the issue of climate change. He was concerned about his affiliates in places like North Africa, for example, who are doing some stuff that he does not agree with as al-Qaeda, as his own narrative. They are focusing on local enemies, and he wants them to focus on the United States. So he ordered the commander, bless you. So he ordered the commander of al-Qaeda in the region. He said, by the way, your Arabic over there is probably not that good. So why don't you take everything we give you and translate it to French? Because maybe you guys will understand better. He was micromanaging hostage negotiations with different affiliates. It takes you to a trip. You can live with Osama bin Laden in his hideout, and you can see how he was dealing with all these issues. But also at the same time, something happened. It's called the Arab Spring. Bin Laden was shocked. He was watching all these changes that's happening in places like Tunisia, places like Yemen, places like Egypt. He was fascinated. He was fascinated by all these changes. So he immediately asked all his commanders. He said, look, I need you to start coming back to Peshawar. We can have a base in Peshawar. Everything I told you before about that trunk, about America, forget about it. Because what we're seeing today in the Middle East, it's something we did not see since the time of Laden. This is an amazing opportunity for us. Everything we did on that blessed day of September, meaning the September 11 attack, the way we fought and broke the cross, meaning defeating us in Afghanistan, is working. The agents of America are collapsing. Our role today is to start focusing locally. We need to aid all these rebellions that's happening all across the Muslim world. We need to build relationships with the people in the streets, with the tribes. Do not call yourself al-Qaeda, because the moment you call yourself al-Qaeda, the US and the West will come and attack you. But you have to do one thing. Remember our strategy that's called management of savagery in 2005? That's what you have to do now. Management of savagery is basically the strategy of al-Qaeda. And we were able to have our hand on a copy of it back in 2005. Management of savagery said there's 3 phases for the war against the infidels around the world and the United States. Phase 1, a lot of terrorism to weaken the states. Phase 2, create chaos and manage that chaos. Especially building relationship in the Muslim world so people can depend on you for social services, for law and order, for everything. And only when people start becoming loyal to you, you go to phase 3 and establish what they call the Blessed Caliphate. He said, phase 1 accomplished, now you have to focus on phase 2. And that's exactly what's happening today. Some members of al-Qaeda, especially people who were very close to him, for example, the head of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, a guy by the name of Abu Basir al-Yemeni. I had the pleasure to put him in jail, and I left, and then he dug a tunnel and got out of jail in Yemen. He used to be the chief of staff of Osama bin Laden. He told him, Sheikh, do you want Sana'a today? I can deliver it. Bin Laden said, yes, I want Sana'a. But I want us to be able to keep Sana'a. Don't occupy any areas. Just continue to aid the rebels in the country to build relationship with them according to the plan. That's where Osama bin Laden was. That is the last order he gave before the Navy SEAL bullets took him down. He was optimistic. He was optimistic about his victory. His wife was actually sending a letter to another friend of hers and saying that the bells of victory are ringing. That's it. What you see in Tripoli today with Gaddafi falling, what you see in Egypt, even our security situation was better. And it's becoming better. A week later, bin Laden was killed. He even started having some weird dreams about victory. He wrote a letter to his mother. And bin Laden was very close to his mother, by the way. He was Mama's boy. He wrote a letter to his mother, and he said, I had a dream that a black snake wanted to hurt me. So I hit that black snake, and then the brothers around me said, oh, you broke all its teeth. Now it cannot hurt you anymore. And he ended, thank God. But bin Laden believed in dreams, believed that the dreams are a window for the future. So mentally, he thought he's on the top of the world, he's winning, all his strategy is working, and boom, we took him down. But again, al-Qaeda wasn't only Osama bin Laden. There's a person who took over immediately after Osama bin Laden, a guy by the name of Saif al-Adil, who's virtually involved in every single terrorist plot al-Qaeda did around the world. Saif al-Adil is the security chief of al-Qaeda. He's a member of the Shura Council. He's a stubborn guy, but also at the same time, as loyal as he is to Osama bin Laden, he has the guts to stand up against him. He believed that the whole idea of an attack with planes is a bad idea. He voted against it in the Shura Council. Actually, most of the leaders of the Shura Council, the Qaeda leaders, voted against it. It was only Ayman Zawahiri, who's now the commander of al-Qaeda, who's an Egyptian who was not actually a member of al-Qaeda early on. He has his own Egyptian terrorist group called Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Him and his cronies were the only people who voted for it. They did not get the vote, and Osama bin Laden overruled everyone, and he said, we're doing this. When Khalid Sheikh Mohammed went to Osama bin Laden, he said, Sheikh, I have this idea about planes hitting the World Trade Center. Bin Laden said, go ahead. He said, we rent Cessna planes. I fill them with explosives, and we hit the World Trade Center. So Bin Laden looked at him and he said, why do you want to go to war with an axe when you can go with a bulldozer? And Bin Laden changed the planes of the plane operation to hijacking planes that's going from the East Coast to the West Coast because they will be full with fuel, and use them in the operation. 4 different operations. Operation number 1, code Faculty of Commerce. Faculty of Commerce is the World Trade Center. Operation number 2, Faculty of Finance, the South Tower, World Trade Center. Number 3, Operation Faculty of Art, the Pentagon. Number 4, Faculty of Law, Congress. Fortunately, the heroes on that plane over Pennsylvania prevented the Faculty of Law of happening. So al-Qaeda is more than one person. Saif al-Adil was able to be the interim leader in order to take a bay'ah, an oath of allegiance, to Ayman Zawahiri, who was the second in command. Throughout the book, you will see the history of Saif al-Adil. This wicked person who actually, when he was working in Saudi Arabia, he literally faked his own death. He sent someone with a jacket that his mother bought him to take it to Egypt and say that his son died in a car accident. And then he went to Afghanistan in the late 80s. And then he became a member of al-Qaeda. And he just disconnected his relationship with everyone from his past, to include his own mother and his own family. So this guy, by the way, is still alive. Ayman Zawahiri was able to get all the bay'at that he needs thanks to Saif al-Adil. One affiliate in the Horn of Africa, led by a person who was the chief of staff for Saif al-Adil at one point in Afghanistan, who was involved in the East Africa embassy bombing, refused to give the bay'ah to Ayman Zawahiri. Interestingly enough, a week later, he was killed at a checkpoint in Somalia, and the person who took after him gave the bay'ah to Ayman Zawahiri. Ayman Zawahiri was able to continue with the plot of Osama bin Laden, the plot before bin Laden's death. However, the Arab Spring was too much for somebody who is uncharismatic to handle. Ayman Zawahiri is a doctor, he's a surgeon, he comes from a very rich, well-to-do family. His grandfather on his mother's side was the head of al-Azhar, and he's a diplomat. The other grandfather, he was also a known doctor, a known surgeon in Egypt. But at the same time, he has no charisma. I mean, do you even watch Ayman Zawahiri give a videotape or a speech? You know, 10 minutes into it, you're ready to blow yourself up. I mean, the guy is so freaking boring. So, and Ayman Zawahiri wasn't liked by the original members of al-Qaeda because they all felt that he's a freeloader. He's an Egyptian who cannot go back to Egypt, so he lied to bin Laden, and he started telling him all the stuff that bin Laden want to hear, and bin Laden brought him to be a member, and later on a leader of al-Qaeda. You know, a lot of Qaeda members look at Ayman Zawahiri and the relationship between Ayman Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden like a sugar daddy. You know, that's how they view him. So when the conflict happened in Syria and al-Qaeda went from Iraq to join the Syrian civil war, they went under the leadership of Ayman Zawahiri. However, al-Qaeda in Iraq changed over the years. Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi was always a problematic guy for al-Qaeda. He wasn't a member of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. In the book, you will see all the details about his life. He was a person who just wanted to kill other people, takfiris they call. They think the main war is against infidels, the infidels who are Muslims, actually. So it's a war between a Muslim and a Muslim, not really between the Muslim and the West. So because of that difference in the ideology, he wasn't really welcomed in al-Qaeda. However, after the Iraq war, al-Qaeda wanted somebody on that stage. And unfortunately, the speech of Colin Powell overnight made al-Zarqawi a very popular figure among the Mujahideen. When a nobody was mentioned in the Security Council by the United States as justification for the invasion, guess what? Overnight, that nobody is a top leader. So when al-Zarqawi took over, al-Zarqawi started to attack other Iraqis. You know, he found that sectarianism is the key to destabilize Iraq. Most of his attacks were either against Shia, to create a civil war, a sectarian civil war in Iraq, or against other Sunnis who don't agree with him, who don't agree about his positions against the Shia and others. In Anbar province alone, which is a Sunni province, he was able to assassinate more than 250 Sunni scholars. Most of his shock troops were not from Iraq. Most of them were foreign fighters, especially from Libya and from Tunisia. Those are the people he used. Most of his suicide bombers were Saudis. Many Qaeda members went to Ayman Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden, and they said, look, you don't know what that guy is doing under your name. But they cannot do anything because they need him. And he knew that. Frankly, I think when Zarqawi was killed, they were a little bit relieved. But the entity that he created always had a problem with al-Qaeda Central. So with the civil war in Syria, the whole dynamic started to change. Al-Baghdadi at the time, who was the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq, as it was called, later it became ISIS, al-Baghdadi was controlled by a lot of different leaders in the Islamic State of Iraq. Not the same people who were with Zarqawi. He was controlled by Baathists, people who are generals and high-level security folks in Saddam Hussein's regime. See, what we did after Iraq, we actually took all these nationalists, secular nationalists, and we put them in the same jail with all the jihadis in a camp in southern Iraq called Camp Buka. The jihadis looked at the nationalists and they said, wow, these guys are smart, they have strategy. I mean, yeah, they were military officers, right? And the nationalists look at the jihadis like, these guys are crazy, we need them. And thanks to Camp Buka, we actually put those two together and created a Frankenstein that's half Saddam, half bin Laden, i.e. ISIS. So when they went to Syria, Baghdadi and the Baathists said, you know what? The jihad in Iraq and jihad in Syria is one. Everything that's happening in Iraq is under the leadership of Baghdadi and the leadership of these Baathists. Some of the members of al-Qaeda, especially the Syrian faction, which is al-Julani, who was actually the head of al-Qaeda in Syria, said, no, I don't think so, because the dynamics of the Syrian civil war is very different than Iraq, so it has to be two separate jihads. Baghdadi thought that Julani is betraying him. He thought that was treason. So he announced the establishment of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and Baghdadi is the head of it in Syria. And Julani is the head of it in Syria. Julani said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about that. All these things happen in public, audio tapes, on the internet, in public. So they decided to go to Ayman Zawahiri to be the judge. Ayman Zawahiri said, you know what, I agree. He already doesn't trust the people in Iraq, his affiliate in Iraq. He said, I agree, these are two different things. So Baghdadi and ISIS said, really? And who the hell are you to agree? Or we don't even know where you are, where you're hiding. You're a traitor because you believe in Sykes-Picot. You believe in these artificial borders between countries. So guess what? We established a state, and we're going to raise you a caliphate. So they established a caliphate because of that. Now, everything that we've seen with ISIS, the ideology, the narrative, the Salafi jihadi dimensions of their thinking is basically very similar to Osama bin Laden. The only difference that they actually jumped to phase 3, where al-Qaeda decided to continue in phase 2. And al-Qaeda now can tell ISIS, see, we told you, you stupid guys. You established a caliphate. America and the world came and destroyed your caliphate. Now you went underground, like what happened to us after 9/11, when they beat the heck out of us after we went to Afghanistan. And look at us. We're taking advantage of the Syrian civil war still. We have thousands of fighters in Syria still, especially in the Idlib province. Look at us in Iraq, in Yemen. We took advantage of the Saudi war against the Houthis in Yemen. We took advantage of this sectarianism that's happening. We had about 600 members before the war. Now we have 6,000 to 7,000 members, and we control big areas in Yemen without announcing that we're controlling areas. Look at us in Somalia and how we're expanding our reach. Look at us in the Sahel region in North Africa, how we're able to join all the Salafi jihadi groups together and form an organization very loyal to al-Qaeda Central, but also at the same time have all the different ethnic groups that before never worked together, like the Fulanis and the Arabs and the Berber and so forth. So our strategy, the Sheikh strategy, Bin Laden strategy is working, and you guys are on the run. However, the narrative is very potent still. If you look at the ideology of al-Qaeda and the ideology of Osama bin Laden and the ideology of ISIS, it's the same one. It's all based on using religion to justify their wars because of some conspiracy that the world is in a war against Islam, that there is this Jewish-Christian conspiracy to destroy the Muslim world. This is what Osama bin Laden actually mentioned in his declaration of jihad in August 23rd, 1996. I'm telling you, I had to translate that whole thing at the time. Whew. But this is the same thing that we still hear today, and we still do today. And everything that we've done through this called war on terror, sometimes it's kind of justified what they are talking about. Osama bin Laden, even when he signed his declaration of jihad of 1996 in Afghanistan, he called it Khorasan. Khorasan is a historic region that, partly Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asia. But why did he say Khorasan? Not a lot of people paid attention to that. Why does he call Afghanistan Khorasan? Why al-Qaeda Central call themselves Khorasan? Because there is an alleged hadith, a saying of the Prophet, that towards the end of times, the righteous armies of Islam will come out of Khorasan. Their banners are black, and they will be victorious until they get to Jerusalem. He's feeding into that so-called prophecy. But one of the biggest phases of that prophecy, guess what? Something that's going to happen in Iraq, where the world and the infidels will invite Iraq because they are fighting over the black gold under its rivers. I was in Afghanistan, and we're arresting people on the field. And one of bin Laden's, actually one of his very first accountants, and he continued to be with him, and later he became his cook, and he's very close to Osama bin Laden. He said to me, he said, so when are you invading Iraq? And at the time, just like, what the heck you're talking about, invading what? He's like, oh, you're going to invade Iraq because this is a prophecy. Guess what? We invaded Iraq. Talk about playing their playbook. Bin Laden said how our human rights, our principles, this is all propaganda. America doesn't believe in any of these things. Exhibit 1, we gave him Abu Ghraib and secret jails. When the war in Syria started, right, we had 40,000 people. Actually, the number is probably more towards 45, but let's go with 40,000 people from 110 different countries that went to join ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The whole Afghan jihad in 10 years, we had less than 12,000 from around the world. So imagine how potent this ideology is. So yes, we can keep killing people. We killed bin Laden, we killed Baghdadi, we killed a lot of their leaders. But it's going to be like whack-a-mole. We kill one, 10 will come up. Why? Because we're not focusing on the ideology. We're not focusing on the narrative. We're not focusing on the economic and cultural and political factors that feeds into them finding recruits. We always wanted something to be like a checklist. Let's do this, this, this. This is a very counterterrorism strategy, cookie-cutter approach. We can put it in Afghanistan, Iraq, New York City. It works. It does not go like this. There is no cookie-cutter approach because people join for different reasons. The reason al-Qaeda is strong in Yemen is different than the reason it's strong in Somalia or in Afghanistan. People join for different reasons. Some people join for economic reasons. Some people join because they are looking for something bigger than themselves. They are looking for an identity. Some people join because of family and tribal affiliation, because of friendships. And then we came with the idea, oh, let's rehabilitate these guys. Okay, good luck with that. I mean, I believe in having an off-ramp. But I believe when we are talking about rehabilitation, and hopefully after you read all the different characters in the book, like bin Laden, like Zawahiri, like Zarqawi, like Saif al-Adl, like Baghdadi, like Abu Ali al-Ambari, like al-Julani, all these guys are characters. So you're not, you're actually understanding, having a view to see what's happening through the eyes of these individuals, with the hope that you better understand where they come from and how we can better defeat them. So the universe of extremism has such a gravity that it's pulling a lot of people in. They are using the internet now, especially in social media, to put their narrative, and people, can't get, they go in, they get sucked into it. The best counter-narrative strategy is actually to create bigger universes with bigger gravity to take these people away from that. All our strategy should be in preventing people from being a target, not trying to rehabilitate people who are already in. If you do studies from the IRA to Hamas to Hezbollah to the FARC to al-Qaeda, people who are inside, it is extremely impossible to get them out. They are busy in staying alive and doing operations, carrying out the mission. They are not interested in critical thinking and why I'm doing this. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but that's the exception, not the rule. Somebody probably has money issues, somebody feels he hasn't been treated right, but those are sources. Those people we flip, and I flipped few of those, right? But that is not the national security strategy. That's not the counterterrorism counter-narrative. I hate to say, people on the inside have two options. Either a bullet or the handcuff. That's it. And when you put the handcuffs on them, sometimes when they are in jail, they start rethinking their lives. And maybe you can use them to help others not to be attracted to that universe. So, almost 20 years after 9/11, when it comes to dealing with Islamic extremism and terrorism, we are in a worse situation. The Arab Spring, which a lot of us thought is a peak of hope and democracy, al-Qaeda and bin Laden understood it differently. They understood it correctly. A state without a dictator is not a state. What we understand democratic states to be, it's a very complicated thing. You have civil society, independent judiciary, law enforcement, and towards the end you have election. You don't take a country, you put it on a microwave with 6 months of shock and awe, and then you're going to have a democracy, voila. That's not how it works, right? They understood that Iraq without Saddam is just a bunch of Shia and Kurd and Sunnis and ethnic groups. There is nothing called nationalism in the way we understand it. The same thing in Libya. It's East and West Libya. It's tribal. The same thing in Yemen without Ali Abdullah Saleh. It's regional and factional and tribal. They understood that. And they did exactly what Osama bin Laden asked them to do. He said, be careful. Don't allow anyone to fill that vacuum, because that person who's going to fill the vacuum is going to be the new agent for the Americans. And that's why we look around the Middle East and we see total chaos. And this chaos can only be solved, not only with the military approach, but with diplomatic engagement to deal with these incubating factors that's feeding into this war. That definitely cannot be solved with a tweet. Thank you very much.